George Orwell famously wrote in his book 1984, "Who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past." The three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all share a history, a version of the past found in the Hebrew scriptures. And joining me today, January 29th, 2025, got a huge guest from over on YouTube. He has been interviewing all the top scholars. He has been dropping all the top documentaries, and he has been exposing the fictional origins and fabricated Hebrew scriptures. And he's going to share with us a great deep dive into why the Torah, the Old Testament, the Tanakh is basically fake. Neil, Gnostic Informant, what's up, man? Thanks for being here again.
Man, I'm excited for this, man. The last one was a good time. We talked about Christmas stuff. But this is a way better, This is a way more important topic, I think.
Yep. Well, that was Christmas time, though. But this is really your forte. You've been specializing in that, too, the pagan parallels and the Christmas pre-holidays before Christianity. But this is the big one, your favorite topic, your obsessive topic, basically, at the moment. So,
yeah.
So if you're just, like, meeting somebody for the first time and you're trying to explain to them the Torah is fake, what's, like, your first go-to thing?
Okay, good question. Because we presuppose, most people actually, I shouldn't say we all, but most people presuppose that Israel was this place where people practiced Judaism for like centuries. Some people will even say all the way back to the Bronze Age. By the time of Moses, he laid down the Torah, and this little region of the world that we call Judea, the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom, was always there. They were Jewish. They're Jews. So they're Jewish. But then you actually look at the actual history, the sources, the primary text, the archaeology, and you find out what they say about themselves is actually shocking. And I'm gonna sort of jump around a little bit, but I want to go to like the smoking gun just off the bat. I just want to like.
Hit us with the first thing, thing that destroys it.
So, when Israel was conquered by the Assyrians in the 6th century BCE, this would be after the time of the prophets. This would be after Moses, obviously. This is after David and Solomon. The Old Testament is almost complete at that point in time. The only books that you don't have yet is like Zechariah, Nehemiah, Daniel, and some other stuff that comes in post-Babylon stuff. So there's a few texts that aren't written yet, according to the tradition. Mm-hmm. So what happens at that time is a lot of millions, I think, Jews, they flee Jerusalem and Israel, and they go into Egypt because they don't want to get taken to Babylon. This happens, and they set up a colony in Elephantine Island, which is all the way at the southern border of Egypt, all the way down near like Sudan, very far down. But they get there. So between 597 and 586, roughly a decade, they're traveling there and setting up their own. They set up a temple to Yahweh there, and they call themselves Yahudai, Jews. They call themselves Jews. They aren't just random people that I'm just associating with Jews. They call them. We are Jews from Jerusalem. So what does that tell us then? Now we have a time capsule from 597 to 586-ish, all the way down till they get freed, basically by Cyrus, which technically is a historical true event. Cyrus did technically let the Jews go back to Israel. Anyways, long story short, for almost 2 centuries, over a century and a half, 175 years, give or take, they are living in Elephantine, and they are writing texts on papyri with Aramaic. They are writing letters to other cities, like Jerusalem is one of these cities that they write to, and they tell us a lot about themselves. So now, here's the question: you would expect, well, as I mentioned, this is long after Moses, long after David, long after Isaiah, and most of the prophets,
long after when we're told they existed.
Right. By this point in time period, they're Jews. We would expect to find Psalms, Proverbs, maybe some verses of the Torah, maybe some variants, maybe there's some different versions of the Torah. Maybe there's a different story about Moses that we never heard of yet. Maybe they have a whole different story about Abraham. Maybe they have a different flood myth that we haven't found. But guess what we actually find through that whole 200-year period? Zero. Shocked archaeologist. This has been so this for some
Was
reason
this just recently excavated?
In the last 100 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
But for
Are
some
they just
reason,
now like translating all of it and realizing like,
yes,
hey,
this
there's
is
no
all
Torah here?
a lot of this stuff is cutting edge. They're still translating text. People are still working on this stuff. They're still looking, they're still digging spots out.
So,
But
so are the scholars that you've been interviewing, are they like the first to
yes,
actually
to
like
publish on
translate
this stuff.
Okay.
They are the
And
first to
who
actually
are they?
publish. So you have Gad Barnea, you have Jonathan Adler. Uh, Russell Gemerkin isn't like an archaeologist. He's never been there or anything. Gad Barnea has been there. He went there himself and he's worked on. But Russell Gemerkin he's noticed this for decades. He's been writing peer-reviewed books, publishing them through peer review. He's doing the peer review process, not just some random guy writing in his basement. He's been writing on this for decades now, saying this is a red flag. I don't think Judaism is as old as we think it is.
Was he writing on the Elephantine documents, or was he just like looking at the Torah and seeing that he believed it was 270 BC in Alexandria that it was written?
He's doing a couple of things. He's looking
at the time of the Septuagint.
He talks about Elephantine a lot, but but it's not just Elephantine. I want people to realize this. Elephantine is a big deal because it's a perfect time capsule. Like we can't there's no question of when these texts are written. It's either between 597 or 410. That's when they get out. That's when around 410, 400 is when they get out of Elephantine and go back to Jerusalem for good, and they stop living there. But anyways, the Elephantine, the only reason why I bring up Elephantine by itself before I even talk about Judea or Babylon is because it's a perfect time capsule. There's no question. None of these texts can be before or after. So we have it's the perfect like test study. Like there's nothing you could do to say like, oh, they wouldn't have known or they would have not. No, they came from Jerusalem after the 6th century BCE, long after the supposed religion should have took root. After, by the way, Josiah, the Bible even says Josiah made reforms. Josiah's reforms happened before Elephantine. That means Josiah's reforms. How did that happen? No one even knows about the Torah, but he's making reforms saying you can't worship Asherah or Baal or put up poles anymore. Why is he telling people this? They don't even know what the Torah is. So Elephantine, there's not a single text. We have thousands of papyri. We have inscriptions on rock. We have all sorts of like pottery they found with inscriptions on it. It adds up to the thousands, not hundreds, thousands. And there's not one mention of Abraham, not one mention of Moses, not one mention of Noah, not one mention of even David isn't getting mentioned, or Solomon's not mentioned.
What is being mentioned?
They worship Yahweh, but it's not monotheistic. Yahweh is sort of like the head honcho with other gods underneath them. They're polytheists like everyone else at the time. Sort of like Zeus is the head honcho and all the other gods. Their Yahweh is like the Greek Zeus at that point in time. The whole monotheistic thing, that's way later. That comes after Zoroastrians and Platonists sort of changed the game a little bit. Plato comes along and says, no, there's a one. He calls it the one who's perfect and good and all-knowing and the creator, the demiurge. Zoroaster had a similar idea, but his is more dualistic. There's Angra Manu and Ahura Mazda. Anyways, in Elephantine, what you find there is nothing to do with Judaism. There's no Torah. There's no laws. They're eating pork. So we have sources about them making pork and eating pork. They're actually not doing circumcision. Only the Egyptians are doing circumcision. The Jews aren't. Isn't that weird? You would think it's the other way around. They're not doing circumcision. There's no Sabbath laws. Nothing like that.
And when are these texts dated to?
597 to 410, roughly.
So there was no Judaism basically before
no
that.
Judaism. There's no mention of the Torah. There's no mention of Moses. There's no mention of, I already mentioned Abraham. They don't talk about any of the prophets. There's no Psalms. There's no Proverbs. There's nothing. Zero. They thought they found a Passover letter. Now let's talk about that real quick. They found a letter that they thought mentioned the Passover. For a while, this was published as like we found one thing. We found the Passover. It's mentioned. But here's the thing about that one. Even if that one does mention the Passover, that one's dated to 410. And guess what they're talking about it as if it's the first time they've ever heard of it. They're getting a letter from Jerusalem telling them to practice some sort of Pesach. Now Gad Barnea came along and said, we don't even know if this could have been a different kind of Pesach, because there was this is during the Persian period, and the Persians had their own festival during this week, which was very similar to the Passover. They even have like a sacrifice of they have a sacrifice. They have a betzine table with an egg on it, and they eat flatbread just like the Passover does. So he thinks it comes from the Persians, but here's the thing: that letter.
Did it say unleavened bread? So they had unleavened bread,
No,
but it wasn't connected. Okay, just flat
this
bread.
this letter doesn't even say anything about bread. This letter tells them
Okay.
to drink some sort of sacred beverage during the Pesach, and it's teaching them about the Pesach for the first time. They don't even know what this is. So this is like a smoking gun in 410 BC. They're just learning about Passover for the
So
first
they don't
time.
have the Exodus Passover story.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's not from the Exodus. And that's another thing. The Exodus. That's a huge claim. Millions of people leaving a country. That's easily going to be found in the archaeology, in the primary source records. There's not a mention at all in any of the Egyptians kept better records than anybody. The Egyptians wrote their records on their walls. You could go into a temple and there's hieroglyphics on the wall telling you exactly how the temple was built, by who, what year. Their record keeping was amazing. There's nothing about an Exodus. There's nothing about Moses. There's nothing about Jews or Hebrews. There's only a Hyksos people, but they're Semitic. Yeah, we could say that. But they were rulers. They weren't slaves. They were rulers that were deposed, and this happens 200 years before the so-called Exodus. 200 years is a long time. That's like from now between us and the American Revolution almost. You know what I mean? Like there's not the same thing. But anyways, I wanted to go back to the Elephantine thing because that's shocking that there's no evidence of Judaism from that in that time period at all. They don't even know about it. Even if they were apostates. Even if they're apostates.
Your dog okay? Was your dog attacking you?
Being annoying.
Show that dog. You got the cutest dog ever. Can you? It kind of looks like a Boston Terrier.
She's a
face.
French bulldog.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's not just Elephantine though. This is raised questions. But what else do we have? Elephantine doesn't have any mentions of the Torah, and then people start thinking about it. Wait a minute, the Mesha Stele mentions David. That's not the Torah. David comes in Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. David's not mentioned in Exodus or the Torah. Or the Torah is the first 5 books of Moses. It's Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, and Leviticus. There's no David in there. So it's like, wait a minute. Okay, so we have David being mentioned in Mesha Stele. That dates to 800 BCE. Now, that's not in the Torah. Okay, so that's one thing. Then it's like, oh, wait a minute. None of the inscriptions at all mention anyone from the Torah. There's no mention of Moses, Abraham, Noah, or anyone from the first 5 books of Moses in any single inscription before the Hellenistic period, before around 300 BC.
So there's nothing that's ever been found in archaeology.
Nothing.
That talks about any of the Torah until Hellenistic age.
Until 300 BC.
Like, so right before they created the Septuagint.
I don't mean like I disagree with these findings. There is zero. Zilch. Nothing. Hard data, zero. And there is mentions of the kings, like Hezekiah is mentioned, David's mentioned, House of David's on the Mesha Stele. There's mentions of, so the kingdom of Israel is a real place. I'm not saying
they found they find some type of stone or something that said David on it as well.
House of David, yeah, Mesha Stele.
It was real old. Yeah.
800 BC ish.
But it was nowhere as big as they claim. It was nothing like they claim.
That's another thing. Israel Finkelstein's an archaeologist from Haifa University. He's been digging up ancient sites for the last 30, 40 years. And he says this kingdom of Israel that we thought was grand and big is really just a backwater. It was like a little tiny satrap of whoever the ruling class was. They were just like a little trading post. And he says they didn't even have writing until after around 800 BC, when we find the Mesha Stele. That's when they start writing for the first time. They were illiterate before that. So they're not like a player in the game of like between the Assyrians and the Hittites and the Egyptians. They're nothing. They're not like, they're just like some little backwater that's like getting tossed around like a volleyball. But we have archaeology from Babylon, where they lived in Babylon. They lived in Jerusalem. They lived in the northern kingdom of Samaria, and Jezreel, and as well as Elephantine. And if you took all of the archaeological data, all the papyrus scrolls, all the physical things we could touch with our hand, and say, how much of this even has knowledge of the Torah? Zero. And the first person in record to ever mention Moses or Abraham is a Greek named Hecataeus of Abdera. He's the first person to, and we lost his original text, but we have him in fragments. Josephus quotes him, and when Josephus quotes him, he says he's writing, and like he's telling the reader, there's a reason why you haven't heard of these people yet, because their laws are so holy that they stayed hidden until the time was right or something. And you can look at that and go, wait, it sounds like it's all being made up around this time. So Gomurkin's one of these people who said the Torah, the original Hebrew Bible, was probably written a decade or so before the translation of the Septuagint, the Greek Hebrew Bible. So it's like you don't have a long time in between when the Hebrew Bible's written down, probably around 300-ish, or completed, I should say. They probably had sources that they're using that are older. Mm-hmm. But when they're writing the text that we know today as the Old Testament, that's a product that's finished around 300-ish BC. And then so Jonathan,
do they believe it was packaged together in Alexandria also?
Yeah. That's what Gomurkin thinks. That's what Gad Barnea thinks.
Yeah,
that's what a lot of people
think.
I saw
your interview with Gad Barnea.
Because said, where else would you have all this information to write a text like this?
Yeah, he said that the Library of Alexandria is like what triggered the creation of the Torah and then the Septuagint.
Yeah. Because that's the only place possible where you're going to have sources in Aramaic from the Persians. Because the Persians, before the Greeks had control of Egypt, the Persians were controlling Egypt. So they had control of all the libraries. There's probably tons of Aramaic, Babylonian, Assyrian, Hebrew text laying around in this library. Mm-hmm. So when you look at Genesis, Bruce Loudon he died a couple years ago. He was this scholar who wrote about Greek mythology influencing the Old Testament, not just the New Testament. He talks about he pointed out to me that there's a story in Homer. It's one of the Homeric texts. It's about the daughter of King Agamemnon, Iphigenia. And so King Agamemnon is told by the prophet Chrysius that he has to sacrifice to find the omen, to get the omen, to know if he should sack Troy or not. This is just the way the text is written. So he gets told by the prophet that Zeus says that in order for you to get the good green light to go sack Troy, you have to sacrifice your only daughter, Iphigenia. So what does he do? He takes his only daughter, Iphigenia. He takes her up on a mountain. She goes willingly. What does that remind you of? She goes willingly to her sacrifice. He ties her up on a pyre and is about to slice her throat. And then all of a sudden, a messenger, which is angelos, angel, a messenger of the goddess Artemis shows up and stops him. And then in a blink of an eye, Iphigenia is transported to the temple of Artemis. And so then what happens? Artemis replaces the sacrifice with a deer. What does that remind you of?
Jacob's sacrifice, binding of Jacob.
Jacob and Isaac.
It's
the same story. It's the same story, except instead of a ram getting replaced with it's a deer. But the reason why is because Artemis' sacred animal is a deer. So it's more specific to Artemis. Whereas the Jews are taking this story and they're rewriting it for their audience. You also have other examples of that. Noah's Ark story. You find tons of stories, not just the Babylonian Enuma Elish or the Epic of Gilgamesh, but also Berosus and Manetho have their own versions of this flood story where there's a prophet who is told by God to build a boat and take his family and animals on there. And then right after 40 days or however long, so some of the stories vary on the time period, he lets off a dove and a raven. Very specific. That's not like some thing that, there's different flood stories and they're all different. No, it's very specific. He lets off a dove and a raven, and then he knows that it's time to land. That happens in other stories that are the Hebrew Bible is borrowing from. So we know that they're using sources to put together this text. But here's another crazy part that adds a whole nother layer. It throws a whole wrench in this whole thing. Jonathan Adler recently published a book called The Origins of Judaism, and he found that in the archaeological record and the source materials that we have, there is zero evidence. This is what he says. There is zero evidence of any king or rule of judges in Israel that is enforcing the Torah until the Maccabean period in the 160s BC. So that means the Torah, we think of Jerusalem and Israel as this place where they were law-abiding, Torah-observant people for all the way back until Moses, right? We think of them as like the pagans are over here in Greece and Italy and Egypt, and then the Jews are over there, and they're separated from everybody, and they practice the Torah over there.
Well, even before Moses, with Abraham, they were circumcising. Like that's kind of
right.
Abraham's supposedly like the first Jew.
And there's also no evidence of Abraham too.
The patriarch.
That's another thing. The Genesis has stories about Abraham winning wars in Syria, winning major wars over cities and land that he wins, and he wins these territories through war. Now that's a claim. When you say there's a war that happened, you can find that. Every single war that's been written about in history has been found in the archaeology, and if it hasn't been found, it's a myth. It's myth. Even Troy has been found. We know the Trojan War even happened. There is no sources, no archaeology, zero, nothing about Abraham doing any of these things for 175 years, it says in the text. He lived for 175 years fighting wars in Syria and Lebanon and Aram, or where the Armenians are. Mm-hmm. He was fighting wars in those regions, and there's zero evidence for this. There's not a single text, not a single inscription, nothing in the archaeology that indicates that this actually happened. Zero, nothing. Mm-hmm. There's no mentions of the Babylonians that mention Abraham. There's no Assyrian records of Abraham. There's no Hittite records of Abraham. There's no Mitanni records of Abraham. Nobody knows who Abraham is. The Egyptians don't mention Abraham. He goes to Egypt in the story. They don't mention him. It's not a real person. It's made up. No. His name means father of nations. That should tell you something. It's a fable. That's another thing. The characters' names in the Old Testament, they all have their names all signify what they're doing in the story. Yeah, that's like the number one sign of a fable. Mm-hmm. And so go back to Jonathan Adler, what he was saying was, before the Maccabean period, they were not circumcising still, all the way up until 160s BC. They were eating pork still. We have evidence of them. We found like pork in the remains of archaeological digs and pottery and stuff. They're eating pork.
Porks next to yarmulkes.
Right. No yarmulkes though.
I know. I'm just
no synagogue. I'm glad you mentioned
that. Yeah.
There's no synagogues in the archaeological record until after 175. The oldest synagogue is like 175.
Wow.
BC. There's no synagogues before the 2nd century BC. Zero. Not one. And so what his conclusion was, and let me just share my screen real quick. I want to show one thing. So actually I want to show two things. So this is a famous coin that was minted in Athens. It's Athena. It's Athena on the left and her famous owl with the olive branch. Those are pagan symbols of Athena. Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that, let me stop this for a second and share one more. We found in the archaeology of Jerusalem from the same century. Look what they're doing. They are minting coins with the same owl with Athena's head on it in Jerusalem. That destroys the first of 3 commandments, having no graven images or no other gods. They're minting graven images on coins.
They're touching everyone's pagan gods in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, and there's also a coin with Zeus on it.
Did they know that it was the Jews doing that, or was that like the Greeks were there also?
This is before the Hellenistic period. This is the 5th century BCE.
Okay.
This is this is a perfect time period. They are freed by the Persians. This is after Cyrus and before Alexander. So we're in that juicy range where they have their land back. They can do whatever they want. This is 450 BC.
Mm-hmm.
They're in control. This is the time of Zechariah. This is when Zechariah was writing, 450 BC. And they're minting coins. They're minting coins with pagan gods on them. There's no Judaism yet. Judaism does not exist.
Hold on though, but couldn't some Greeks just drop some coins or something in that area?
They're in Aramaic. They're Hebrew.
Oh, okay.
So the Greek coins have Greek on it. Those coins are minted, and we have thousands of them. So it wasn't just a couple that we found.
Gotcha.
Thousands of these have been found. Thousands, and they're minted in Jerusalem with Hebrew on them, Hebrew writing. And some of them have names. Some of them have names of the high priest on them.
Oh, okay.
So there's high priests in Jerusalem that are minting coins with pagan gods on them, which means they're not legit. So they have a priesthood, they have a kingdom. Israel's real, but their religion was not what we think of it as today.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can find the one that has the high priest on it. But yeah,
so in Elephantine, they don't have anything of the Torah. That means no Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, no Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, no Noah, no Moses in the Exodus, none of that.
Yep.
And let's get real, guys. If Christianity's not real, if Exodus isn't real, can we agree on that? And if Exodus were real and the 10 plagues really happened and nobody in Egypt wrote about it, and if that were true, this is speaking to the Christians and the believers out there. If Exodus were true, all of Egypt would have converted and worshipped the God of Israel, and it would have been written about somewhere, but it's written about nowhere because it's completely made up only around 275 BC.
Right.
Like, who can argue with that? Like, there is no proof. Like, if Exodus were real, all these crazy plagues, everybody in Egypt would have worshipped the God of the Hebrews if that were true, and it didn't happen. Right. Not only did that not happen, but nothing's written about it. Obviously made up and fake. The whole foundation is fake.
And then it makes you go. So I've heard people say this before. I've heard I think I've heard Jim Bob say this, and I heard Andrew Wilson say this, and he's asked, "Why do you think your religion's true and the other ones aren't?" And they say something like, "Because we have an apostolic succession," and like, all right, I personally can pick holes in the apostolic succession. I think there's it's a little more, it's not as black and white as you think, as far as going back to Jesus himself, to like the time of Constantine, for example, the Council of Nicaea. But
there could be a Peter. There was a Peter that probably set up a church in Rome.
Let me say what you're about to say, because I agree with you. I even think there probably might be some truth to it, though. Like there is some sort of a jagged line that goes back. Let's just grant that it's true. Let's grant that there is, from the time of Peter all the way down to the Council of Nicaea, you have a straight line of teachers and students.
Yeah. Eusebius made those up. If they had gaps, they'd make them up, or they could have. I don't know. I wouldn't say they're all fabricated, because we know Christianity existed.
Right, but my point is this, though. My point is this. Even if I granted that, let's say there's a straight line from Jesus to Peter, all the way to the Council of Nicaea. What is Jesus fulfilling? A fake prophecy from a fake religion that has no proof that it was even practiced until 160 BC? And there's no Abraham or Noah or Moses or anyone. What? Who cares?
It's all based on Daniel, which is a forgery too.
Some guy got pinned to a cross, and everybody was going crazy over it. And what? That's what you think? Apostolic succession to what? To nowhere.
To the first apostles that invented him, James and Peter and Paul. Right. That's who I would say, because nobody really thinks that there wasn't a Peter or a Cephas. Right. It's Cephas or Cephas. I've heard both. Cephas. I've heard both.
It means rock in Aramaic. Yeah.
Cephas is what I usually say, but I've also heard Cephas.
Cephas. Yeah. Petros. It's because Petros means rock in Greek. That's why it's Peter.
In the Total Theeshu, the secret life of Jesus, the Jewish secret life of Jesus, they say that Simon Kepha, Peter, was a double agent that took Messianic Judaism out of Judaism and like paganized it and like took it to Rome with Paul.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
Right, but you know what's interesting about that is the Old Testament is doing the same thing the New Testament is doing. It's taking pagan
Mm-hmm.
ideas, it's taking regular, normal, local religious stuff, and it's sort of personalizing it for a new audience, which is Jerusalem. Which is so it's probably written sometime. There's probably sources that go back to 5th, 6th century BC. I'm not doubting that, but by the time they get to the 3rd century BCE, when there's a whole population of Jews living in Alexandria that are in connection with Jerusalem, now you have the opportunity to put together a real, actual text that's going to last. With it has like philosophical, it's philosophically informed. It's got you got the history text, you got chronicles, you got you now. That's why I think it gets finalized and puts together as the text that we have today. And it's written around the 3rd century BCE, but it's not it doesn't take root as it doesn't become like the official religion until like 160 BC. So we're
Mm-hmm.
only 160 years before Jesus when there's a thing called Judaism that exists.
Like right before the Dead Sea Scrolls and Daniel,
Right.
basically.
And that's funny because the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest text in the Dead Sea Scrolls dates to that period.
Yeah, the Maccabean
150s
period.
BC. Yeah.
Right.
And that's it. There's nothing that goes beyond that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Zero.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Dead Sea Scroll that dates to 500 BC.
Yeah. Can you expand on? I think it's Gomurkin. He talks about how it's Plato's Noble Lie and Library of Alexandria and the origin story.
Yeah, Plato had this idea that the children were being taught erroneously in his time. They were growing up learning Homer and Hesiod and other Orpheus, stuff like that. And he thought that the way the youth were being brought up and educated was producing a state that was not ideal in his opinion. This is, by the way, if anyone wants to know, this is in Republic, particularly book 2 and 3. Book 1's more about what is justice, and they kind of have an argument over that. Anyways, book 2, we start getting into religious matters. And then he introduces this idea of a noble lie. And that is the idea that it's sometimes good to lie to people for a greater cause. And he says that there should be a priesthood, an ordained priesthood, overseers who control the text, control the poetry and the myths that are taught to the children. And that the reason why they need to lie is because the past needs to be changed and rewritten in order to sort of mold the future, if that makes sense. He lays this all out in Republic. I'm not like paraphrasing it to where I want it to be. You can read it for yourself. This is what he says. And he says that the morals of people would be better off if they believed in a God who is perfect rather than flawed. So they talk about, why is Zeus whining? Why is Zeus, getting upset? Why is Zeus doing that? Why is Zeus doing this? God should be all powerful and perfect, and there should be no doubting of his intentions. And heroes like Achilles. Why is Achilles crying in Hades? Our heroes should not be crying in Hades. They should be in heaven and they should be in paradise, like happy.
Nothing phases them.
Yeah. So they come up with the idea, and then Plato even says, our people, our Athenians, should have their own place where they go when they die, a separate place, not like Hades where everyone else goes. All the other bad people should go to Hades, but we should have a designated place for our people. And it's like it's almost like he's formulating the idea of heaven and hell.
Mm-hmm.
So Plato, you can see, and so this is what I think. Me and Gomurkin both think that in Alexandria by the 3rd century BCE, Platonism was the dominant force in philosophy and theology. And so when they're putting together the Torah, it was informed by Platonist ideals. It was
just
very
like Philo
much
was Hellenized Judaism. They were doing that before Philo. Philo of Alexandria in the same place.
Yeah. Oh, and they're
Possibly
all
even
love
his
Plato.
family. Where was his family there at that time? Do you know?
Philo?
Philo's family, yeah.
He's in Alexandria.
I know, but he was 1st century though. Were they there 200 years before, his same family, or at least?
That's a good question. His teacher was there his teacher Aristobulus was there all the way in the 200, all the way back to like
Mm-hmm.
2nd century BC.
Mm-hmm.
So
But regardless, we see the Hellenization of Judaism happening in that area.
we see not only we see it happening, but we have sources from like Artapanus and Hecataeus of Abdera that are saying that, and there's another Jewish story. Aristobulus, Philo's teacher, Aristobulus, was talking about how Moses was actually like a rewriting of this character named Musaeus. And you can look it up for yourself if you're watching this. Musaeus, Musaeus, of Athens. There's a big Wikipedia page on him. There's this guy. He was a prophet, a seer, a polymath, a philosopher, an oracle giver. He was just like Moses, lawgiver, all those things. And he was like, so there were people in Alexandria who actually thought there's like 5 different sources that say this, not just 1 or 2. I could probably find 5 primary sources in between 300 and 100 BC that think that Moses was a rewrite of Musaeus of Athens, who was the teacher.
How do you
I'm
spell
sorry,
the
he
name
was
again? Musaeus?
Musaeus of Athens. And this guy was the student of Orpheus. Orpheus is the first person in any source to be called theologian. They use the word theos logos, means God's word, God's mouthpiece. So we think of theologian today as like someone who writes about religion. The word theologian was applied to somebody who was a mouthpiece of God. Yeah, Musaeus of Athens. Yeah. Go to his Wikipedia page. Go to all.
Okay.
Just want to show people like what it says about him. Just off the front, watch what it says. Legendary polymath, philosopher, historian, prophet, seer, priest, poet, musician. And like, think about it. Moses and the Levites, they're all a bunch of musicians and poets and priests and philosophers. So it's sort of like, you could see how someone would think this.
Mm-hmm.
And look, oracular responses. What is Moses doing? He's going up on the mountain and he's coming back with oracular responses. An oracle is someone that translates God for the people, who hears the word of God and translates it for everybody. That's what this guy was doing. So anyways, he was the student of Orpheus. Orpheus is the first person to be called, number 1, theos logos, theologian, a word, a piece of God. And he's also the first person to be given the title of a relevator, an apocalyptor. Mm-hmm. The word apocalypse in Greek means revelation. Orpheus was literally called the revealing one, the apocalypsis in Greek. So the idea of apocalyptic literature, we think that's Jewish text, right? Mm-hmm. That's Orphic. That's Orphic. And if you read Plato was he was initiated into the Orphic mysteries himself. So all this stuff lines up with the Musaeus thing. The idea of Judaism sort of being a sort of offshoot of Orphism for the Hebrews, for the Hebrew-speaking world. It's also very heavily influenced by Zoroastrian thought too. But here's the thing. Plato himself was in contact with Zoroastrian magi. So I don't even think you can separate Platonism from the Magus crowd, from the Zoroastrians. They all sort of believe in the same philosophical worldview. They just have a different way of telling it, different languages. You know what I mean?
So they have like Judaism's basically a syncretic mix of Greek religion, Canaanite, Zoroastrian, and Egyptian, right? I know you've covered some interesting
which is right where
connections.
Which is right where they sit. They sit right at the crossroads of their, to the east of them is Babylon, to the south of them is Egypt, southwest of them is Egypt. To the north you have Anatolia, and to then the sea is right next to them. They're the Mediterranean world. Mm-hmm. The Greeks are living in Cyprus. Cyprus is right there. They're trading with the Greeks. So the idea that they wouldn't be copying the Greeks, they're living so far away from them. No, the Greeks were in Cyprus. The Greeks lived in Cyprus. Cyprus is right there. It's the closest island to Phoenicia or Israel. It's right there. They're trading with the Greeks. They're trading with the Hittites. They're trading with the Egyptians. They're in that world. They're not siphoned off. There's no force field around Judea. They're still part of the Mesopotamian Mediterranean world like everyone else. So they're going to be adopting ideas from them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Wasn't there some interesting Greek connections with the Old Testament as well, like with the Greek god, the name of the Greek god?
Oh yeah. So
Mm.
Yao, if you look at the oldest physical manuscripts of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Greek, not Hebrew or Aramaic,
Mhm.
because believe it or not, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it wasn't just Hebrew manuscripts; it was Greek and Aramaic too. Um, the Greek ones, the Greek Septuagint that we have today, which is the Old Testament in Greek, uses the word kurios for God, Lord. Kurios means the Lord. That's why everyone says the Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. They don't say Yahweh. You don't walk into a Christian church, they don't talk about Yahweh. They talk about the Lord. Why is that? Because a decision was made by the Catholic Church in the 4th century, maybe the 3rd century sometime, before the 4th century though, to replace the original Tetragrammaton, which is Yahweh, with the word kurios and uniform. Keep the uniform kurios from the Old Testament to the New Testament so that they can like connect the two books as one. Because the original Greek manuscripts had the word Iota, Alpha, Omicron, or Omega, I'm sorry. Iota, Alpha, Omega. So it's IAO in English. IAO.
Mhm.
Yao. But what's funny about the word Yao is there's a Greek god with that name. Dionysus has a name. Dionysus has many names. Bacchus, Dionysus, Liber Pater, Sabazius. He has all these. Zagreus is called Zagreus. He's got all these different names, right? One of them is Yao, and Carl Karenya even points out that the name Yao was found in an inscription in Crete during the Mycenaean period, and I think another one in Pylos too, in Sparta. So this name for Dionysus, Yao, is actually pretty old, but it was also known to later antiquity writers like Macrobius, Plutarch, who else? Diodorus of Sicily mentions this name as well. Anyways, this was one of the names of Dionysus, Yao. So Plutarch was like, Plutarch's living in the end of the 1st century, early 2nd century. He's going, what is this god that these Jews worship? And he's like, I think it's Dionysus. And they're like, it's a symposium. And his friends are like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, well, think about it. The name Yao, that's Dionysus' name. Adonis is Adon.
I don't know.
He's like, there might be some sort of connection between Adonis and Dionysus going on. He's like, but I don't think that necessarily they copied it. He said, I think it's just they're both coming from the same ancestral form of this god going back farther, which is I think is true. And then he even points out that the religious festival called the Sukkot, which is a Jewish festival that takes place in the fall equinox week. So the first full moon after the fall equinox, just like the Passover happens, first full moon after the spring equinox. Well, the Jews have another festival called the Sukkot, first full moon after the fall equinox, and it's for a week, 1 week long, 7 days.
Mhm.
And during this festival, they carry date palms and fruits. Fruits. Bacchus is a fruit god, right?
Mhm.
So guess what else? Guess what the Greeks were doing at this time period? Same exact week of the year. First full moon after the fall equinox for 3 days, not a week. This one's a little bit different. Just being honest here. For 3 days, the Greeks carry palm branches and fruits into the temple. It's called thesmophoria. And guess what the word thesmophoria means in Greek? It means lawgiver, lawbringer.
Mhm.
Thesmophoria, law bringer, law
They had
bearer.
the date palms in Palm Sunday when in Jesus's triumphal entry as well. They said
Yes,
Hosanna
yes.
prophecy, and then the date palms as well, which was some
And
prophecy.
Dionysus is also depicted riding on a donkey into Athens. You
Really?
go to the Met Museum, they have tons of them, tons of vases with Dionysus riding on an ass into Athens, with people carrying date branches behind him. So, but check this out too. Dionysus is not just a wine god; he's a god of swelling of the fruits. So the thesmophoria, the fact that they're bringing these fruits in the temple, is very Dionysian. But then there's another layer that happens here. Lawbringer, right? Thesmophoria means lawbringer. Well, if you look at the Sukkot festival, there it is. That's a Greek. That's a Roman or Greek one, I think. But yeah, that's one of them. There's also you also find them on coins too. But anyways, so Thesmophoria, law bringing, right? This is what Plutarch was bringing up, and he says, oh, that's what I meant to say. The Sukkot festival. If you actually look at what they're commemorating the wandering in the desert for 40 years.
Yeah.
And Moses bringing the laws, lawbringer. It's a thesmophoria. It's literally a thesmophoria.
Well,
it's commemorating the law bringing. But not only that, real quick, go back to the Greek side again. What are they commemorating? They're commemorating Demeter, the goddess Demeter, wandering around the wilderness, trying to find her daughter Persephone, and then bringing the laws to the Eleusinians.
Yeah. Is there anything about a tent? Because I know on Sukkot they build tents that they built while they were.
They build the tents
desert.
because that's what the Israelites did in the desert.
Right.
I don't know if the Thesmophoria has anything about tents.
Not a parallel with the tents, no.
I haven't found anything like that yet. If you found it'd be shot. It'd be game
Right.
over.
It's
That'd be game over.
Sukkot is a 7-day holiday where they sacrifice 70 bulls. Also.
Yes. Oh, that's another thing. The Assyrians had the Kisu festival. Same week as the last two that we mentioned. Right at this fall equinox, full moon. Because everyone had lunar calendars back then. Julius Caesar was the first person to come along and say, "Screw lunar calendar, let's do solar." And then everyone followed solar after that. It was only the Egyptians before Caesar that were different. Then now, before that, everyone was lunar calendar. So this is the same week of the year. That's why I bring that up. The Assyrians had a Kisu festival where they slaughtered 70 bulls during the same exact week as the Sukkot sacrifices 70 bulls.
Sorry, I missed it. Who's doing the 70 bulls?
The Assyrians were doing this.
Really? So they copied that tradition too.
And that was a tradition that kept going on all the way through to the Persians. So there's evidence that the Persians were keeping this tradition around even after they conquered the Assyrians. Mm-hmm. So that means the Jews would have known about this during the Persian period.
Totally. Their other holiday, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where they have the two goats, that's a ritual from the Middle East as well. That it's not original to them.
Right.
You've heard of that, right?
Yeah. Not only that, you also have the which one? Who was it? I think it was the Egyptian. No, it was the Assyrians again. The Assyrians also have a spring equinox festival where they sacrifice one lamb every day. Not one lamb for the whole festival like the Jews did. Mm-hmm. The Passover lamb was sacrificed. The Assyrians had a whole 7-day week festival for spring where one lamb was sacrificed every single day. And then this is another weird thing that I noticed. The Romans did this. The Romans sacrificed a white lamb on the Ides of March every year. Mm-hmm. So the full moon of the spring equinox, they sacrifice a white lamb, the same as the Jews did, and the same as the Assyrian. This must have been a universal thing.
Well, yeah, I've seen rabbis explain that the reason in the Exodus story that they sacrificed a lamb, the Passover lamb, so the angel of death passes over the Hebrews' homes, was because the Egyptians worshipped the lamb. So they were sacrificing their god.
Yes. The lamb would be the god Ammon. So this is actually funny you mentioned this, because Diodorus talks about the god Ammon. He's a ram. He's a ram god. Mm-hmm. And his son is Bacchus, who's also an image of a ram. But a baby ram is a lamb. So Dionysus was actually kind of like a lamb of God in a weird... It doesn't explicitly say that. But if you put two and two together, you're like, wait a minute. That's how they would have perceived it. Because the sacrificing the lamb was for the god, was in derision of the god Ammon. Mm-hmm. You brought this up, though. This is huge. The Exodus story. We talk about how it's fake. Another reason why I know it's fake is because there's all these conflicting versions of it. The one we have in the Bible is not the only version we have. There are other sources of the of the Exodus that happened in different time periods. Number one, big red flag, Pharaoh. They never mentioned Pharaoh's name. So we don't even, what Pharaoh is it?
Yeah. Just generic Pharaoh.
Did you know how many times a primary source that mentions Pharaoh ever left his name out?
Yeah, never.
None. Every time we find a source that mentions something that happened with a Pharaoh, the Pharaoh's name is mentioned.
Right.
They don't just go, Pharaoh said this.
No mention of Joseph rising to rule because of his dreams in Egypt.
There's no
also.
Joseph in any Egyptian records at all.
Yeah. No 12 tribes.
No 12 tribes. Yep. Nothing. There never was a 12 tribe allotment of land. There's no sources that say this land here is the land of Benjamin, or this land here. That all happens after the.
It was probably only in Israel and a Judah at one point. That was probably
there was Judah and Israel. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
never
after
the 12 tribes.
And then after the Maccabee period, they start to try the 12 tribe thing. They start to try. They start to do a lot fake little areas. This is after this is in 100 BC. This is way later. Anyways, back to the Exodus thing. No mention of Joseph in any sources from the Egyptians. He was the second most powerful person in the Egyptian kingdom, according to the Bible. Yeah. You would think you easily find that. There's all these texts about viziers. Viziers are usually the right-hand man to the pharaoh. We know who all the viziers are from 2000 BC until 400 BC. There's a list of every single number 2 guy. None of them are Joseph. None of them. Anyways, another thing on top of that. Oh, by the way, Solomon. I'm going to take a little detour. Go back to the Exodus for a second. Solomon. The claims about Solomon is he had all these wives, and he's in control of all these lands, and he had all these riches. Right? That's a big claim that you should be able to find in the archaeology. You can't find it. There's nobody even knows who Solomon is. Not a single source outside of the Hebrew Bible mentions Solomon once. He doesn't even exist. No one knows who he is.
The richest man in the world he was supposed to be,
the richest man in the world who had all these kingdoms.
And the wisest.
Yeah, the wisest. He had all these kingdoms under his helm. None of them mention him. They have no idea who he is. And then the Queen of Sheba, his kind of sort of a side chick or whatever. There's they don't mention who she. This is like the Pharaoh thing, because there is a kingdom called Sheba down in modern day Yemen, Saudi Arabia region, right where the Red Sea is, Red Sea. There is a kingdom of Sheba down there, and the dates line up pretty well, right around 1000 BC. It's around there, okay, but there's no the Queen of Sheba. That's a title. The Bible never says who she is, so it's like Pharaoh. It's just a generic name for a generic person representing a kingdom. So there is no Queen of Sheba. She doesn't exist. It's not a real person in history. They try to then in Esther, you get real characters, but which is King Xerxes. But Esther is not a real person. Her name means Ishtar. Her name comes from Ishtar, and her associate Mordecai, Ishtar and Marduk. So they're playing games. You can see they're playing games with pagan sources, and they're Judaizing it. But let's go back to the Exodus real quick.
Yeah.
So there's no mention of we don't know who the Pharaoh is. Number 2, if we take the genealogies of the Bible, Jesus all the way back to Moses, it gives us a clear genealogy. You could do the math. You could find out what year people died. You could find out what year they were born, and you can get yourself from Jesus back to Moses, and you're going to end up roughly around the 13th century BC. 13th century BC. That's when Moses would have lived. Did you know that at that time, Canaan was part of Israel? Or I'm sorry, Canaan was part of Egypt. That was their land. They own Canaan. You can't escape to Canaan because you'd be escaping into Egypt. You're still in Egypt. So it's impossible for an exodus to happen in that time, because you had to leave Egypt, you would have had to go all the way to the land of the Hittites. You have to go all the way to Syria, where the Hittites were ruling. They didn't go all the way to Syria. They were in the Sinai Desert. The Sinai Desert was part of Egypt. They were ruling that land. And guess what else happens after that? Ramses Ramses goes into Canaan and wins battles and takes over shit. He doesn't lose. He doesn't let anyone get away. He wins. So that's all nonsense. And then people say, well, but it's the Hyksos expulsion. The Hyksos expulsion happens centuries before that. Centuries before that. And there's no Exodus. They were in power. They were the ruling pharaohs, and they get taken out of power. That's it. There's no Exodus. Now, one more thing I want to mention about the Exodus. There's conflicting stories about Moses. We have sources from ancient Greek sources about Moses that say that he lived during the reign of Pharaoh Bacchus. Let me share my screen real quick. You got to see this. See this?
Yeah.
This is how you know the Exodus didn't happen. Okay. This guy's name is Bacchus in Greek. Bacchus. All right. He ruled from 725 to 720 BCE. Now check this out. So, can you see this? Mm-hmm. Tacitus, by the way, he's citing an older Greek source, Hecataeus. This is in 3 different sources that we could find, where he says that Moses was living during the reign of this Bacchus. That's the 700s BC. Wait, what? That means that Moses lived after David? What? So this is the original story about Moses, was that he lived in Egypt during the reign of Pharaoh Bacchus, who kicked them out of the desert. This is what he says. Let me just read this real quick. He says, most writers agree. Notice how he says most writers. That means in Tacitus's time, there was multiple sources about this. This is what the status quo of the day was. Mm-hmm. Agree that stating that once a disease, which horribly disfigured the body, broke out over Egypt, King Bacchus, seeking a remedy, consulted the oracle of Ammon. You mentioned Ammon. That's why I remember this. The god Ammon, the ram god, the lamb ram god, was bidden to cleanse his realm and to convey into some foreign land this race detested by the gods. The people who had been collected after a diligent search, finding themselves left in a desert, now this makes more sense because back in this period, the Sinai region wasn't part of Egypt. They could have escaped and they would have been out of Egypt in this time period. And not only that, Moses is only one of a few people that get kicked out. It's not millions of people. It's like a few hundred people that got rounded up and kicked out. And they were Hebrews too. And then it says
it's not millions, by the way. It's 600,000.
Oh, okay.
Right.
It says they agreed and in utter ignorance began to advance at random. Nothing, however, distressed them as much as the scarcity of water. Now watch what happens here. They had sunk ready to perish in all directions over the plain, when a herd of wild asses was seen to retire from their pasture to a rock shaded by trees. Moses followed them, and guided by the appearance of a grassy spot, discovered an abundant spring of water. This furnished relief. After a continuous journey for 6 days, on the 7th day, they possessed themselves a country from which they expelled the inhabitants. So you get the 7th day of rest coming from this story, and it's in 700 BC, not 1300 BC. So wait, which one is true? Mm-hmm. Probably none of them. Probably none of them.
Yeah,
they're probably both made up. That's how you know its story is not true when you have multiple variations that are okay. If you had variations that both happened in the same time period, let's say you had one version of the story that happened during Pharaoh Ramses, and there was this one says 600,000, that one says 500,000. That's the same story. But when you have two different stories, one of them is they're 700 years apart from each other, and they have completely different accounts of what happened. These aren't made up stories. They're not. These are not real stories. This is not real history.
Jesus is dated to different times as well, in the Talmud and in other.
There's some weird sources about Jesus living in 100 BC or something like that.
Right.
But one more thing I want to bring up.
Joseph, something else about Joseph in Egypt or Joseph in the Talmud. What is that connection?
Joseph in the Talmud because in the Talmud they're writing about this god Serapis, which is Osiris.
Mhm.
The word Serapis is a compound of Osiris and the Apis bull. The Apis bull is like this calf, this lunar solar calf that's tied to Osiris. And they would bury this calf and they would mourn over it. And there was like some Osiris resurrection ritual. The god Serapis is a Hellenistic version where they combine the Apis bull with Osiris and he becomes Serapis. Interestingly enough, I'm going to put that aside for a second. Remember what I said there. In the Old Testament, Joseph is sold by his brothers, is basically killed. Like he's basically like dead. He's put into a dungeon that represents Hades. It's like a representation of a god, of someone dying. He gets put into Hades. Then he prophesies the future and the imagery that's given is bread and bread and grapes and wine. So he does this prophecy where he tells one person that he's going to die, another person that he's going to get out, but he uses the imagery of wine and bread, like a Eucharist. Those are two images that are sacred to Osiris. Drinking the wine and eating the cakes is what will initiate you into the cult of Osiris, where you become part of like the eternal ones. Just like the Eucharist in Christianity, by the way. Anyways, this happens to Osiris. He gets sold by his brothers. He gets cast into Egypt, into a dungeon, and then he rises back out of the dungeon and becomes the most powerful person in Egypt next to Pharaoh. The story of Osiris is very similar, where he gets basically killed by his brother Set. His brother Set, brother kills him.
Yeah. Like Judah, Judah sells his brother Joseph.
Yeah, Judah basically does the same thing.
And Judas betrays Jesus. Same thing.
Set kills Osiris. He goes into the underworld, and then
Joseph
rises
goes
back
in the
up.
pit.
Yeah, then rises back up triumphantly.
Mhm.
So you could see there's like some euhemerization happening with people even point out Yosef. That's how you say his name in Hebrew.
Mhm.
Yosef is similar to Osiris. Some people pronounce it that way, I guess, or Husiris with a h. Is that how you say it? People say that in Greek. Anyway,
what did the Talmud said again? It said that
Joseph. That's what I was getting to. The Talmud says, it's the other way around. The Serapis is copying Joseph.
Yeah.
The Egyptians they made a god after our Joseph.
Wrong.
They don't realize they incriminate themselves by doing this.
Yeah.
Because they're admitting that the parallels are real and legit.
Right.
But then they
do the same thing with Jesus, comparing Jesus to Dionysus, like early church fathers.
And they do this with Plato too. They go, Plato was borrowing from Moses.
Yeah.
Even though Plato never mentions Moses, Plato doesn't even mention Israel. Plato doesn't even know what Israel is.
Yeah, he's not copying Moses.
Israel's a backwater.
Mm-hmm.
Guess who? How many times Israel?
These bad apologetics end up disproving them even more. They aged really bad. Yeah.
Herodotus never mentions Israel once. Herodotus does a whole he does a whole survey of every single kingdom from Spain. No. Beyond Spain, the Azore Islands. He talks about the Atlanteans and all this, whatever. He goes all the way off the islands out past Spain, and he talks about kingdoms all the way to India, to Afghanistan and India. And he writes about the Scythians. He writes about the Hyperboreans, the German people, the Celts, the Africans, the Carthaginians, the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians. Everybody gets named. Every single person is mentioned by Cyrus or by Herodotus, except for Israel. What? Because Israel was a backwater. It was nothing. They were not even a player on the map at all. So the reason why I brought that up is because what was I saying right before that shit? Plato. Plato never mentioned Moses or Jewish scripture or anything related to that. But when the Talmud Jews are saying that Plato is copying Moses, what they're really admitting is how much Moses and the Torah is borrowing from Plato.
Right.
So whenever they do this, it's hilarious to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like a diabolical mimicry, right? When they say that all the pagans were copying the Jesus story
Yeah.
so that we would think that they weren't real. They're
Justin
confessing to
Martyr.
the fact of that they came
Yep.
first.
Justin Martyr, Arnobius,
Mm-hmm.
who else? Couple other early Christian church fathers.
Mm-hmm.
They said that the mysteries of Mithras was the devil impersonating our Eucharist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because the Eucharist was a common initiate. I already mentioned Osiris had his own
Yeah.
version of the Eucharist, but
Yeah.
the
So did
Mithras,
Melchizedek.
yeah, there's the idea of taking a bite of bread and drinking wine to be initiated, getting anointed on your head. That's like everyone was doing that. That's just how you do initiations. But the Christians had to be the ones that invented it. No, they're copying us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, you copied everyone else.
Yeah, their bad copes and apologetics really came back to haunt him.
Right.
Even
And
worse.
when they say that, like if Justin Martyr never said that, we might not have even known that there was a Eucharist in Mithraism, because we don't have a lot of sources that survive about what the Mithraists were doing. They're very secretive. But Justin Martyr goes, "Oh, the way the Mithraists do a Eucharist, they're copying us." Well, thanks for telling us, because now we know that you copied them.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Like, so this is a theme: the Exodus, the Passover celebration. It's mythical, and then also Purim, their other holiday, is also a fictional story. Nothing in Persia ever wrote about that. You're telling me that there's this decree, and then the girl next to the king convinces them to slaughter 70,000 Persians, and there's not one mention of it anywhere?
No, didn't happen. And yeah, you're right. All of their big festivals are, you can almost see how all of them are sort of
Hanukkah's the
adopting.
only one that's real, basically.
Yeah, but even Hanukkah, is actually a passage about Hanukkah in the Talmud
Mm-hmm.
about them comparing it to Saturnalia, because it happens right. So Saturnalia happens the week before the winter solstice.
Mm-hmm.
Hanukkah happens the week after winter solstice. The Talmud writer says this too. He goes, ours is a week after, this is a week before. But if you actually look at what they do in Hanukkah, they play dreidel and they light up candles.
Mm-hmm.
They do that Saturnalia. They two of the big things they did there was they would roll dice and they lit candles. The Vigilaria is the last day of Saturnalia. Vigil means lighting candles.
Well, maybe they copied the ritual ceremonial.
That's
parts,
what I'm saying.
But the Maccabean revolts is
the Maccabean
real,
revolt happened.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. If you look at the Jewish
I don't think the oil lasted for 7 days.
No,
I didn't
but
mean that.
it's
was
either
right.
it's like a combination of some historical kernel combined with adopting culture around them.
Mm-hmm.
So Passover, you can see how they're adopting all of these spring equinox renewal vegetation festivals of Passover. So it's like and then you see, I already mentioned Thesmophoria, and Sukkot festival. They're adopting those winter or fall equinox rites. Winter solstice festival. Think about it. All of their major festivals happen during some sort of pagan equinox solstice event.
Yeah, just like
Passover,
Christianity.
just like Christianity. Passover happens at the spring equinox. Sukkot happens at the fall equinox. Summer solstice. Which one do they have there? They don't even have a summer. That's right. They don't have a big summer solstice festival. But then the winter
was too
solstice.
hot then.
Yeah, the winter solstice though, Hanukkah. So you can see how they have their major festivals during these critical times of the year where pagans are doing shit. They're just doing their own version of it.
Some people believe that. Oh, did you freeze?
No, I'm good.
Okay, sorry. Some people believe there's a theory going around that the Septuagint Old Testament Hebrew scriptures came before the Hebrew.
Yeah, it's nonsense. There's words in the Hebrew Bible. I'm sorry, there's words in the Septuagint Greek Bible that don't exist in any other text besides the Septuagint. Mm-hmm. And that's a red flag. Because how do you even define what the word is? And then you look at the Hebrew Bible, and you find out that what they were
That's
doing
they
is
were making
they're
up words to match
no,
the
no,
Hebrew. Okay,
they're yes, yes.
okay.
I didn't hear the last
Making
part.
up words
They're
to match the Hebrew.
transliterating. So if I say the word Pasak, actually that's one of the examples. The word Pasak. I just thought about that, but it's actually one of the examples in the Bible. The word Pasak is a Hebrew word for Passover. They transliterate it into Greek. They don't translate it. But anyways, there's words that only exist in Hebrew that get transliterated into the Greek side as a Hebrew word with the Greek alphabet on it. There's like dozens of examples of this where you can only go one way. Not only that, they have like some of the Psalms that are written are like written in a way where the certain letters are, it goes A, alpha, beta, delta, gamma in alphabetical order. And in the Greek side, they don't have it because they can't translate it that way. So it just becomes a mess. It just becomes a big, you could tell it's translated. There are certain texts in the Old Testament that started in Greek. Second Maccabees was a Greek story. There's parts of
something suspicious is going on when they have a total fake story about the translation of the Septuagint too. Like, all 70 translators got the same exact thing. Yeah, that doesn't seem legit, does it?
No, but what I think the reason why they made it such a big deal out of it is because at that point in time when they translated the Bible into Greek, I think they codified their scriptures. I think that was the moment when they decided these scriptures need to stay intact this way. Because before that, who knows how much changes that could have happened. There could have been drastic, like there could be inserting Moses into the text where he's not really there. And the reason why I say that is because the prophets barely mention Moses or Abraham or Noah. There's only a handful of times where Moses gets mentioned. I think most of the prophets don't even mention him.
Yeah, you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah. That they're not talking about.
No, but then you find out that, for example, Isaiah lived 200 years before Cyrus, but he mentions Cyrus by name in Isaiah. How does that happen? And then so a Christian will go, well, God told him, so he's just being a prophet. He predicted a person name. Like most prophecies are like, oh, a kingdom will fall, like some vague shit.
Well, Moses wrote down the Torah, and he told Moses about Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel,
and he told him about his own death too.
Right?
But then,
he wrote about his own death.
So we know. So most scholars are like, okay, this part of Isaiah was written later. There's three parts of Isaiah. There's an original layer, there's a middle layer, and there's a way later period. And then even all three layers get fixed and changed, and parts get deleted, parts get added. But so when you come across Moses,
exactly the same in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Just kidding.
Yeah, but when you come across Moses being mentioned by one of the prophets, and you go, well, Elephantine doesn't know who Moses is, so why should a prophet from 700 BC know who Moses is? You kind of have a right to go, they probably added that. And by the way, couple that with he's only been mentioned a few times by the prophets, and when you think the prophets would be all about Moses, all about Abraham, all about that. But no, they're not. They're just, it's a little bit different. You got a different story in the prophets. So
yeah, like you could do a chat GPT and say, is like Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Jacob, Noah, is any of that ever mentioned or referenced in Isaiah? And it says no.
Right. Yeah, most of the prophets don't have a lot of knowledge about the Torah.
Which means that Isaiah is actually older than the version of the Torah that we have.
That's what I was gonna say. If I had to bet money, I would say that there are parts of Isaiah, there are parts of Ezekiel, there are parts of Jeremiah that are very ancient, maybe even 7th century BC. Not most of it though. Most of it probably got added on later in the 4th or 3rd century BCE. So you have to remember these are
super chats. We have 10 more minutes before I gotta go. We got some super chats, so let's start getting to these real quick. First First, my friend Mr. Dice for 100. Thank you so much. So many donos earlier today, and you're still going. You're incredible. He says, great conversation. I'm about to take my bulldog for a long walk while I continue to listen. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you realize how fake the Torah is. Okay, and next we have Dominic Busimi says, a wealth of information for $25. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Dominic. Siscum says, read John Ma's article re-examining Hanukkah. It's highly unlikely the Maccabean revolt or any of the events Hanukkah celebrates ever occurred. Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was disputed. I stand corrected.
The Maccabean revolt happened, but the Hanukkah thing might have been just some tradition thrown in there.
It's highly unlikely they're saying the revolt didn't even happen. I thought that was like a known thing for sure, that the revolt.
Oh, the Maccabean revolt.
The Greeks wrote about that, didn't they?
Yeah, I think we have letters from the Spartans writing to the Maccabees. But I don't know. Okay. I'll look into it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Maccabean. I'm pretty sure the Maccabean revolt. Yeah, because the Antiochus IV really did try to conquer their.
Go into the temple. He's the Antichrist, basically,
right,
of Daniel.
Yep.
Yeah. He's actually the hero, the pagan god that tried to put an end to Judaism. He's the hero, the Antichrist, pro-Antichrist, huh? Okay,
right.
Let me see here. Boleslaw for 15 says, is presuppositionalism inherent to Christianity or Abrahamism in general? From what I see, Abrahamists rely a lot on substituting reasoning with making assertions and with circular logic. Well, that's true, yeah. Presupposition inherent to Christianity or Abrahamism in general. They rely on it a lot. It's one of their tricks.
Who are the Jewish?
Christians. Just.
Oh, yeah. Well, the reason why the precept thing is so nonsense to me is you could just say the same thing to you. Like what it's never like your own. What are you measuring your? The church. Like the church is where I get my guiding truth from.
Yeah, all authority comes.
Now all things. Yeah, so all things are accounted for now, because they're accounted for through the church. Well, okay. Yeah. Well, how does the church know? Apostolic succession. And then you just keep going back, and then you end up where we're at, figuring out if the Old Testament's real, and then it's over with. Then you can pull the tree out from the roots. So presup is just like, cool. You have everything accounted for. Mm-hmm. I can have everything accounted for. I can be completely senile, and I can think that I could be like hallucinating my own God, and this God can tell me everything about the universe, and it's all in my head, and it's all accounted for. I have everything accounted for from my own personal God in my head. But it's the same thing as what you're doing. Having things accounted for doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
Okay.
No, yeah, their whole thing is basically you have to concede that their God is real, otherwise you can't argue against their God. Can you please go and close the door? I'm getting interrupted.
Well, they really emphasize the idea that if you can't figure out everything, and if you how do you know you're not a brain in a vat? If you can't account for everything, so how do you know it's true? Neither can you. It's what
explain the afterlife, explain creation, explain the universe. Otherwise, Jesus is real. Like that is what they try to do.
You're just pointing out the problem that we all face is that we all could be wrong. Period. Mm-hmm. Great. We're in the same exact spot still. Nothing changed.
Okay, Anatomized Deception says Gnostic Informant cannot produce a Hebrew Torah that predates the Greek Septuagint. If he can, do it now. I think this is an Amen guy.
Well, yeah. That's the funny thing about that is your Septuagint is from 1856. So you can't even produce your own Septuagint that predates your own Septuagint. So the original Septuagint, as I mentioned before, the oldest Greek manuscripts have Yao in it. Your Septuagint that you think is the original has Kurios in it. It changed. It's not the original. So just because our Hebrew manuscripts of the Leningrad Codex, for example, is 10th century, doesn't mean that's when we date the text to. So under that same logic, you couldn't date the Bible past the 4th century because the first church Bible is 4th century. So you have to say the Bible was written in the 4th century. It's nonsense. Mm-hmm. You have to go by the evidence. You have to go by textual criticism. And the textual criticism says the Septuagint was translated from the Hebrew. If you could produce evidence that it was the other way around, then you'd have something. Other than that, you're just LARPing.
Oh shoot! I'm sorry, I missed one over on Rumble. It disappeared on me. I didn't get to it fast enough. Sorry for that. Whoever sent that one, I appreciate it. Heraclitus commented on Twitter earlier. Oh, let's see. Maybe he's coming in here. Hold on, let me make sure I got this. Heraclitus said he was going to come in. Oh, wait. He says he has a space. He said you were wrong about something, so I asked if he wanted to join, and he said, yeah. Hold on. Are you coming? You know him, right? He had a space the other day about this same topic, how the Torah is fake.
Oh, cool.
It's almost easier to prove Christianity is fake just by proving the Torah is fake.
I know. That's what I've been telling people. Pull the tree out by the roots. Who cares about apostolic succession? Which church is the true church? Who cares about that shit? What are they fulfilling? That's what I want to know. I want to know if the thing that they're fulfilling is even true to begin with. Why should I care that the Roman Empire became Christian? Oh my God, the Bible said that everyone will follow the God of the Bible. So what? So that's what every religion was trying. Every religion wanted to do that. It's just that's just the one that completed it. So, under that same logic, Islam is true.
Any religion that does want to spread to the rest of the world, if a religion didn't have that, it would have been crushed by one that did, basically. Right. Not surprising that the religion that dominates the world is one that was like the intent was for the God of Israel to rule the world.
What gets me about that is under their same logic, they should all be Muslim, because Islam conquered Constantinople, the holiest city in the Christendom, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, Carthage. Like all of Christendom is gone except for the Gothic Latin West. The heretics, they were heretics those are the heretics in the beginning.
Yeah. When I've talked to my friend Adam King, he's Jewish, and I tell him about how the Torah is fake. He says, "What about the cave of the patriarchs in Israel, in Hebron? That's where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are.
That's all fake.
Are buried. So who do you think is there? What's that?
No one knows. They won't let anyone. They're not letting anyone open those graves up.
Mm-hmm.
We'll never know.
Even if they did, how would they know that the bones, if there's any bones left in the grave, are actually Abraham?
We could. I'm sure there's. I'm sure they can find out something. But it's not Abraham. It's not Abraham. That's for sure.
Right. Well, the Abraham story is so ridiculous too. His wife is 100 years old and gets pregnant, and then he falls asleep and cuts up some animals, and the torch goes through, and he makes a covenant. And this is the foundation of all of the biggest religions in the world that still have incredible impact today. That's why I started with the Orwell quote: "Whoever controls the past controls the present." And it's almost whoever controls the present kind of controls the past too, because they can enforce the past. But who controls the past controls the present, and then controls the future. And our world is based on a false history that the Christians and the Muslims are validating. This.
If you can show me a single primary source, if you could show me a single primary source that mentions the Cave of the Patriarchs before, I don't know, before the Hellenistic period, then you would have my attention.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I've seen, from what I've heard, this was built during the Herodian period in the 1st century BC.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just sort of like made up.
They probably made it up then. They said, hey, they're buried under there when they made it. You're right.
They probably just built it because they're trying
just like how they found Jesus's nails and Jesus's cross and his foreskin and the Shroud of Turin and everything.
Yeah. And so it's not, I'm not surprised that they would do that. This is just what they do. Yeah.
All right. Well, is there anything important that you wanted to get to, or any last thing before we close out that you forgot maybe that's important? Just exposing the fake Torah? How about the fact that in Christianity, like, they're taking all of these scriptures or prophecies like completely out of context, and they even say like, oh, the prophets like didn't mean what they say. That's basically what it's
Because the
whatever
Messiah, is not supposed to be God himself. The anointed one is anointed by God.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just like it's like they're raping the text to make it fit. The anointed one is God himself.
Mm-hmm.
He anointed himself and then made himself do all this stuff for himself.
Yeah.
It's all nonsense. So that the idea they they create prophecies that aren't even in the Old Testament. Like being from Nazareth was not in the Old Testament. That
It could
seems
have
to
been
be
in a version that we don't have anymore, or a book that's just not in the canon and lost, or it could be about Isaiah 11, right? The branch, the Nazarene.
That's another.
They say,
I'm open to that. I'm open to
yeah,
that. That's interesting.
that's their best guess, although it doesn't seem like it's like a perfect,
That's an interesting
Also,
theory.
how
I think.
annoying is it that Paul says like it's in the scriptures, raised after 3 days? Like he never cites what scripture the 3 days
there's
is
nothing in
specifically
there about
coming
3
from.
days. There's
Well, there is in
pagan stuff
Daniel.
about 3
There's
days.
two and a half days, and then there's the 3 days in
There's
Jonah's whale.
Jonah,
But
right.
he never specifically cites the scripture, which I think would have been important.
Right. I think he formulated it from Jonah,
Mm-hmm.
which is coming from Inanna. By the way, Inanna dies for 3 days and 3 nights.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pagan goddess.
It's weird Paul never mentions Jesus as the Son of Man, too, because Mark calls him the Son of Man so many times. And it seems like the Son of Man development would have been what inspired Paul and the first Christians' belief about the Messiah.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to mention something about Noah before we go too.
Okay.
Is that if we're taking this book as his history, because most people think it's a history book, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
If you take the genealogy that you get in Luke or Matthew, once again, and you configure the math, find out when Noah created an ark, survives a world flood,
yeah,
where everyone is wiped out except for him and 8 people total.
and all the animals on Earth. Don't forget all the animals.
And all the animals on Earth, right? You would expect to see a population growth starting in Turkey and then spreading all the way until today that would align with what happened in that book. Mm-hmm. You would expect every single nation. Oh, I forgot to mention, it's around 2000 BC is when Noah did this. That's not that old. That's not that long ago.
Yeah.
2000. The Sumerians are in 3500 BCE.
Yeah.
We know the Sumerians were thriving. When the Sumerians were thriving, you had Indo-Europeans thriving all the way in the north, the Celts, the Egyptians. There was kingdoms everywhere in that time period, 1,000 years before Noah. So what? Yeah. Then here's another thing. Animals. How do you get all these different species of animals spreading all the way across the world? And you would expect to find fossils of animals starting in Turkey and then just sort of spreading out into different regions. Like how did elephants get in South America or not? Yeah. Like how does certain animals get across the ocean from
Africa.
Turkey?
I don't think elephants are in South America.
No, I'm
Africa
saying
is what you meant.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Maybe southern Africa. I don't know how southern they are.
Or how did certain animals get from Africa to South America?
You would have to find fossils of animals along the path everywhere from where Noah's Ark, and not to mention like genetically. And I mean, they find bones up in northern Europe from 10,000, 20, tens of thousands of years ago. And genetically, everybody around the world through evolution and change is way more. We weren't all relatives 2,000 years ago after Noah,
right? And this is one of these things that I bring up when it's like, if Noah didn't actually, because think about how central the story about Noah is so central to both Jewish and Christian theology.
Right.
It's about
if any
sin.
of these things didn't happen, Christianity is like proven false.
That's why they named the laws after Noah. Noahide.
Yeah.
Noah is so important. If Noah isn't real, if the story of Noah is fake, Christianity cannot survive.
Mm-hmm.
It's
same with Exodus, same with Abraham.
Because think about it. The world was cleansed of its sin. Sin is this word that we all know. We all think of sin as something that exists. It doesn't. Mm-hmm. It's made up. But the world is cleansed from sin. Noah is the one chosen to start civilization over with. If Noah is not real, then what sins did Jesus actually die for? What sins was Jesus sacrificing himself for?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense.
Same
The
goes for
whole
Adam
thing
and
is-
Eve. If Adam and Eve isn't real, then what's the point of Jesus and his atonement sacrifice? And
Right.
Paul, and some Christians will say, well, we don't believe in that type of atonement. Paul clearly shows Jesus as the new Adam. Adam brought sin into the world, and one man, Jesus, reconciles it, takes it out.
Right.
Yeah.
If none of that stuff is real, it's all metaphor. What? Then
So
Christ is a metaphor. Then
exactly. To be a
it's
Christian
not-
today,
none
you
of
have
it-
to
none of
believe
it's
in
real.
so much completely baseless, unfounded nonsense from
Right.
the Old Testament.
it's
And they're
astounding.
affirming a fake history.
It's astounding that it's taken this long for most of the world to go, well, you got a point.
Right.
But
right.
and the sad part is it might take another 2,000 years for it to keep going.
I hope
That's
not.
what I honestly think, because Christianity is designed. It's designed to make people want to believe it's true. Because it's the ultimate bargain. Your eternal life, or else, or damnation. I might take that wager. That's
Getting to see all your family members again?
it's
Or
it's
eternal
psychologically
darkness? Yeah.
it's psychologically powerful,
Right.
and there's no denying that.
Totally. I got to wrap it up. Got to go get the babies ready for bed. Powerful show. You're doing great work. Thank you for sharing and enlightening my audience with all of this fake Torah information. Tell everybody where they can find you and about what they can see at your channel.
Yeah, I got a documentary coming out in the next couple days. I want to get it out by the 30th, 31st. So the next couple days, be on the lookout for a long documentary about Roman religion. And
Cool.
it basically explains, because the idea that Christianity conquered the Romans is it's a little, I hate to use the word problematic. I hate that word, but it is, because it's not what you think. What you think conquering was is not really conquering. Romans were already interested in Eastern religion. There's already a trend going in that direction anyway. So Christianity just had the best network of bishops available. So
it didn't conquer it, but like the point of the Messiah and the God of Israel was to conquer the nations in Rome, and it did happen. So, but anyway, anybody wants to see that, we did debate that. I don't even know how long ago, a year ago maybe, on another channel, if Rome was conquered. But oh shoot, he's saying, how do I join? I gave him the link. Sorry, dude, I got to wrap it up right now, Heraclitus, if you're still watching. I sent you the link.
Did you find out what I was wrong about?
He didn't specify. We'll find out. We can circle back to it sometime, or I'll ask you. But I do have to go right now. Appreciate you so much for joining us. Everybody go sub over to Gnostic Informant. Follow him on Twitter as well. He's been more active on Twitter recently. One last comment from Dominic Buscemi, says one more for 5. In Anatomized Deception, the Hominite says, it is a historical fact that the Septuagint was paid for and created in 250 BCE. A Hebrew Torah predating this is not a historical fact. The translation myth comes from the letter of Aristeas, which is a pseudepigrapha.
Yeah.
Cheers and thanks for the live stream, both of you. Thank you, and Anatomized Deception.
Yeah, you can have a fake letter about a fake translation, and it can still be a translation. I agree. I agree that I agree the letter of Aristeas was propaganda to make people think that the Septuagint was special. But I still think that all the evidence supports that the Septuagint is not the original text. It's a translation.
And at the end of the day, if you're saying that the Hebrew version was only done like a decade before, so like what's the big deal? What's
I don't
the
know.
difference
People
anyway?
want it to be Greek for some reason. I think that's very weird. I don't understand what's the point. If the evidence is on your side to begin with, that it's a Hellenistic text, that's big. Run with that. And then you have the support. You have the evidence supporting you. You don't have to look stupid. You have to go this extra route and say the Greek came first.
Yeah, you don't have to push it a little too far that discredits the whole thing.
Yeah, they're writing stories about Judea, about Israel. The people there speak Hebrew and Aramaic. So what do you expect?
Right.
You know?
All right, guys, let us know what you think in the comments below. Clip it, share it, like it. Appreciate everybody for the support. Thank you, Neil, for joining us once again. We'll have to do it again in a month or so. Maybe I don't know. We'll figure out what we cover in the next one. Some Christian stuff probably. And
sure.
appreciate you for coming on. You're doing
And
great
mythicism
work.
too. Mythicism too.
Mythicism, yeah, we should do a big mythicism one. You know, that's whenever
you've
we talk
convinced me on some
offline, that's what I'm always talking about. You know,
Yes.
that's
No,
my
but
big issue.
you've been convincing me on a lot of stuff on my own side.
Yeah, we'll do a mythicism video. There you go. Perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Neil. Take care.
See you.